Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I am Abe with MysticGenmara.com, a small town mystic from the middle of Idaho. And tonight I would like to journey back into our realm of occult and crochet. And I've made a little bit more progress on my current crochet endeavor. Not super big amount, but enough to say that there's been progress made. If I can keep things from falling all over the place. We've added a few more rows. We're starting to get into the more rainbow green aspect of things here. So, with any luck, and another day off or 3, I'll be able to get this completed. So, we'll see. But other than that, we are hopping on over into a little journey into France. There's not a lot of witch hunters that are associated with France and that area, but one of them that is a gentleman by the name of Pierre de Lancre. And this week is going to be completely weird. I've got a lot of things going on in the, IRL world. So, sorry about being a little bit late tonight, and my internet's being a little squirrely, so if I happen to blip out, I'm going to just re-upload the video later. But anyway, back to Pierre. And I'm not going to go by his last name. It's I struggle with French, so there are going to be some words in here where I'm like, I'll do my best. That's all I can say. So we're heading back into 1553, when a bouncing baby boy came screaming into the world, and this little boy was born Pierre de Rostegie de Lancre. Close as I can get to hearing the words and saying them. And Pierre would eventually become a lord of de Lancre, and that's where we get his last name. Again, with your names after your places. Not much is said about specifically Pierre's younger life. There is some interesting family drama, which does actually play into some of his more chaotic views, so we'll bring that into the light as well. Pierre's grandfather, Bernard de Rostegie, or according to the Basque name before it was changed to the French name, Aroztegui, sorry. And the name was originally meaning home of the smith, which would imply that they were in some part of their life blacksmiths. But Bernard detested his personal upbringing, this is Pierre's grandfather, and his bloodline culture of the Basque, it repulsed him something fierce. So he would move his family from the Spanish part of the Basque area into the French part of the Basque area, and actually just outside of that to the area of Bordeaux. And that's when he would change his name from the Aroztegui to Rostegie. And I am trying really hard with the names, so I apologize. Bernard would see the Basque people's culture, which is his own bloodline, as people who are below him. Okay, pinkies up, people. He viewed them as ignorant, proud, irreligious, and most importantly to the topic of our discussion, he would see them as highly superstitious. Okay. Bernard's views would actually influence Pierre in a very drastic way, and not a good way, just so we're clear. He viewed the Basque women, Pierre did, as kinda loose ladies, not appropriate women by any stretch. And he thought even less of the Basque priesthood, which I was kind of curious as to how he knew this, but I think he'd been around enough of it growing up that he kind of saw what was going on. He thought that the priests from the Basque areas were philanderers and that they had low moral... they were philanderers, and with that, low moral accusation, can't even read my own writing at this point, he also felt that they had no zeal for the church. Well, they got to be a priest, and even in that time, that wasn't an easy feat unless you were, really super wealthy and could pay for it. But I do have some bad news for everyone who loves to dance, listen to music that has a beat, that kind of thing. Thanks to Bernard's ignorant influence, and I won't say it was anything but, Pierre hated how the Basque people loved dancing and music that had a very specific rhythm. He thought that dancing and music invited the devil into their lives and into their souls. Okay, calm down. Pierre would be educated at the Collège de Clermont in Paris, and during that time there were some prominent Jesuit priests who would lecture around the area, and they would be using some of these priests' lectures as theology lessons as well. One of the common themes was faith over logic. And as we've discussed so far in multiples of our shows here, especially with witch hunters, faith over logic is how people don't stay alive for very long. And it would appear that Pierre would be a very zealous anti-Protestant person on top of everything else he's got started here. And in 1569 to around 1570-ish, he would join the Jesuits on a mission to free the area of Lorraine from those vile Protestants. Okay. Sorry, the more I research these people, the more I look into them, the more A, I want to slap them. But B, I also want to understand what would make you think that this was the only option. It baffles me to look back at some of the history of religion and spirituality starting from way back before where we're even talking about right now. And it's like there's this continual theme of this warring culture that is inbred into some of the what we would call today mainstream religious beliefs. And they always want to say that they're the only right one, but it's always the right through might. It's not right through your mission or through your lesson, which is what we've been taught, a lot of us. But when you look at the history, that's not how this all started. There was a lot of bloodshed. There was a lot of not so great things that happened back in the day to trigger a lot of the stuff that we have today. So history is important. Anywho, in 1579, Pierre would receive his doctorate in law, and this would lead him to join the Parliament in Bordeaux in 1582. From here, he would go on to become a judge of Bordeaux later on in the year of 1582. And Pierre wouldn't just stay in the town of Bordeaux or the area of Bordeaux. It is said, traveled quite extensively, if I could talk, and studied a lot during these times of his travel. A lot of reading, a lot of listening to different preachers, mostly Jesuit. He would also write massively and extensively throughout his entire life. But during this particular time, just after he became a judge, he would mainly write essays that would be thought of by today's standards as long-winded sermons. Now, there may have been some good things in there. I don't read French, and I can't find full translations of any of this stuff, so I do apologize for that. In one of these essays that was partially translated, he would write about the sin of inconsistency that was possessed by a nature mainly of women. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that he might have been a judge, but I'm pretty sure he was celibate. Not by choice. On what did I just write here? And it was just, I don't know. There were some things here that I was writing really fast because I was kind of annoyed by some of his thoughts, and this is one of those sections. And just the way he treated and responded to women in his younger years, it's really not that surprising overall that he would eventually become one of France's most notorious witch hunters. And it was shortly after becoming a judge of Bordeaux, Pierre would be called upon by King Henry IV to perform a very important task. Here we go. This task was to put an end to all witchcraft and associated peoples in Le Borde and to start destroying the craft that very year in 1608. This is a nightmare scenario. Here we go. And today we are doing Peach Paradise in the GT Synergies. Not sponsored, just really like it. Le Borde is in the French part of the Basque territory. And I didn't get a good picture of this pulled up, but the Basque territory was actually partially in Spain, partially in France, and I didn't realize that. I thought it was almost exclusively in France, but there was this shared part of it that France did have. And so, in Pierre's opinion, we must banish all Basque, i.e. the evil and witches, from France. So this is what was basically the king decreed. In a 4-month window, which is what his term was actually appointed to, he would order the execution of many dozens of people according to his work. Some would speculate later on, during some of the more sensationalized times, it was over 100 people that died in this short period of time. I personally, from going through as much of Pierre's life and information that I could get that was in English, it does appear that there was 100, just over 100, just around 100 people that did die under his name and title, but we'll get into why it's hard to verify some of that stuff here in a moment. But full disclosure going forward, because this is an interesting one. I've not run across this with others. There's a lot of drama and sensationalism. Of course, we are talking about France here, and they did like to do things like this. There are people who think today that Pierre overinflated his numbers to look better with the king. There was a really interesting theory, and I'm going to look into this a little bit more because I'd never heard of it until I ran into this, but what they would call the Basque Panic going on with the Spanish Inquisition, and that fueled a lot of the witch fear as well during this time. And I didn't realize that this was such a huge issue. I knew there was some of this, but I didn't know it was actually classified as a Basque Panic, so learning something new here. And when you couple this Basque/witch fear that was infecting France at this time, with that a very heavily Jesuit influence that Pierre had been indoctrinated with at his school, plus being raised by a Basque-hating grandfather, Pierre was set up to hunt anyone who didn't align with his views and or his perceived bloodline, which was superior to the Basque. Sounds a little familiar by modern standards if we look back 100 years, doesn't it? And we'll get into some more of that here in a second too. Pierre would write a lot of his theories and beliefs down. He was constantly writing. There were a total of 3 books that were attributed to him that we can still find today, just not in English. In these books, he would analyze things like the Sabbats of the witches, shape-shifting, primarily lycanthropy, werewolves, and he had a strange penchant for sexual relations, but not the relations with innocent single ladies. Oh no. Satan would only copulate with the married ones, causing them to violate their wifely vows and forcing them to commit the sin of adultery. This dude would also claim that incestuous relations between mothers and sons were not only required but necessary to, or encouraged, but necessary to bring forth demon-spawned children. I'm not kidding. This was a very common quote from his books. And it wasn't just human relations that would bring forth these demon-spawned children. Pierre also had this thing that kind of, I won't use the word here, but let's just say that animals were required for some of his other thoughts, mainly goats. So that's a little disturbing bit that I had run across. And I really struggle with what was going through these people's heads back in the day, because like in today's culture we have the internet and we have all this nonsense, so it's a little bit easier to hear about these things. But where did you come up with any of that kind of theory back in 15th century France? Like, what kind of books were you reading there, Pierre? Anyway, Pierre would also have some hate for what we will say is the Israelite descendants. He would claim that they were the oldest version of the enemy of Christians and of Christ himself. This theory tends to come from the Spanish Jesuits, because part of the Spanish Inquisition was removal of certain people from their country, and seems like that's kind of been a theme for a lot of these guys too. And there's one more thing that we can attribute to Pierre before we get into his hunting escapades. He would claim that the devil liked the body to be clean, but the soul to be dirty. Pierre believed that the cleaner a person was, the more in line with Satan that they would be perceived as. And so if a person bathed daily or frequently, there was a very high likelihood that they would be seen as demonically attached. Like, really? That's what you got. And the more jewelry that you would wear, decking yourself out with your finest, it would also indicate that you had a pact with the devil, because how else did you get that jewelry? Couldn't be a gift from your husband or a family member or inherited. It had to come from the devil. And they wonder why there was a wave of diseases at the time, because being clean was seen as being attached to the devil. Okay. In one of the books that was written by him in 1612, his prejudices, which there were a lot of them, were basically on full display for everyone to see. This book is called the Tableau de Inconsistency de Mauvais Angels and Demons. Not great with French, so we'll go with that. And I could not, as I said before, I looked and I dug around. I wasn't going to spend a lot of time digging for these books, but everything that I did find was blah 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 French edition, blah 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 Italian edition, blah 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 French edition. I could not find an English translation of anything that he wrote other than small clips that you can dig up on the internet. I'm sure if I went through like archive.com or something, they might have an English translation somewhere, but as of recording this video, I have not run across one. So, but from some of the translated texts that I could get a hold of, we can glean some interesting information. Pierre would claim that the confessions were completely in agreement with previous confessions, and that was, if you got a confession that was matched a previous one, that counted. It didn't really matter how you got the confession, though, as long as the confession matched a previous one. And claims that were similar made the judges' jobs easier, because if a claim sounded like another claim or a confession, then the judge would be assured of the accuracy of the confession. This sounds like a circular argument and not something you ever want to have happen in an actual trial, because that's usually when the things go downhill. But from my mouse is, I have I need to take like a day or two and do some serious revamping of things. But the confessions from the witches in this particular area and instances, according to Pierre's work, would include infanticide, and I'm not kidding, and that's a mother unaliving their own children. We're being careful here. And how these crazy people back in the day believed that a mother would do such a thing, and he claimed that they did this on the regular. Like, this was an every couple year thing where they would pop out a kid just for this purpose. And Pierre also would make the claim that these parents, and I had to double check this, and it's a common theme associated with what he was saying, they would drain the blood and ingest it from said infant. WTF, yo. These people are so twisted and so evil in how they viewed things, because losing children is, especially in the time where not showering or not bathing frequently was a common thing, why would you go out of your way to end your children? There's not a lot of documented evidence in any of these trials that is provable that these people were actually doing something wrong. As I said in other ones, there's other things going on here. Church domination, fear intimidation, land grabs, wiping out cultures and societies from an area. It had very little to do in reality with genuine occult practices, so to speak. Pierre would also describe in this first text a form of corpse bothering, digging up corpses for ritual use, This is a subgenre, I guess you'd call it, of necromancy. Not good things, but again, we're only getting evidence specifically from Pierre at this time, and I'll explain that why here in a few minutes. And why would people be doing this? Like, how are you making these pacts? How do we figure out who the real witches are? Well, of course, Pierre had that answer as well, and it was said that the accused witches would make a pact with Satan himself, not an underling, not a minion of the devil, Satan himself. The witch would, and this one I've never heard of until I ran across Pierre's version of it, the witch would offer a piece of their own clothing to the devil. And the torturers, would claim that they had found said piece of dirty cloth that had been returned to the witch with the devil's mark on it. Are you kidding me? What a train wreck some of these beliefs were. Like, really, a piece of dirty cloth. Okay, and if a witch used magic on a person, didn't matter what kind of magic it was, this was evidence, and the evidence would become obvious to the torturers, the confessors. But here's the messed up part about all of this. A witch could curse a person, and that person would fall afoul with actions, thus earning them a sentence. Okay, if you can prove it, justified. Good luck. But, and this is a very huge but, if a witch or a healer used magic or herbs or fill in the blank to heal a person, they would earn a sentence to the stake as well. You're a witch, burn you. How can healing be considered evil? Oh, that's right. The church didn't authorize this particular form of work, and that did include herbalists, energy healers, which was a little bit different back in the day. But you still had that type of person. It was outside the church's authority, therefore it had to be of Satan itself. Are you starting to see why I have an issue with some of these things? This is historical. You can look it up yourself. You can do your own research. But this is the kind of thing that was going on back in the day. And all confessions, even in France in this time, were gained either through torture, which was a common theme, but a confession could also be bypassed, confession from said witch, with a strong witness who saw the action themselves, experienced the action themselves, or heard about the action themselves. You know, those witnesses who were paid off or scared by the church into their souls being given up and would say whatever they were told to say. Yeah, those witnesses. And this is just from his first book. I would actually love to read through this thing in an English version. Like I said, I don't read French, and Italian is a struggle. So, but Pierre would go on to write 2 more books. In 1622, he would publish his second book called L'Incredulite et Miscreance du Sortilège. And according to some sources I could find, this is basically just part 2 to his original work. But he also would publish a third one, which was more focused on the aftermath of said trials. And that one is called just Du Sortilège. And that was in 1627. And that's kind of where we end with Pierre. He had a 4-month really bad stint. And then I'm going to talk about some of the gossip of the time, because I couldn't find images of him, not even like a wood carving sketch at all, like it's just a little bit weird. But Pierre would end up passing in 1631 in the area of Loubert-sur-Garonne. Again, I apologize, my French is terrible. But Pierre's passing would not soften people's opinions of him. The rumor mill had just gotten started, and some awful things would be attributed to him. He was a witch judge, and I will not defend him on that, but there's some interesting little cracks in some of the modern stories. He would be called narrow-minded, which I will not argue with, because he was. Stubborn and lustful. Well, when you read some of the stuff about, and I edited down for public view, or I mean it's public information, but I'm not going to say some of those things. his weird sexual thoughts and ideas. Lustful is a good term for what was going on in that boy's brain. After he'd passed, people would claim, others would claim, that he'd ended over 600 people and purged most of the Basque people in France out of the country. And that's a very nightmarish number, not as bad as previous subjects with wiping out entire villages, but still not okay. In Pierre's own notes, though, and this is the interesting part, he would only claim to ending around 50 witches, but weirdly enough, 40 witnesses. And I'm not exactly sure why we went after the witnesses, unless they were being paid off and we had to end that noise real quick. But either way, his number is a very conservative number, so a low, safer view of what he did was around 80 souls in that 4-month window. But there's also enough shade thrown his way to say that the number could be as high as 600 or more. The reason the number varies so massively, and this is why I'm saying we're looking at this with a little bit of a grain of salt here, because during years of revolutions, and France is notorious for these, and I'm not knocking France, look at their history. A lot of the court records had been destroyed or lost to time. So in this particular instance, I'm going to be a little bit more generous than I have in other ones where I'm a little more hostile. I will say Pierre himself can be associated with, attributed to, fill in the blank, between 80 and 600 people taken out. Because there's enough theoretical evidence, which I guess you could call it, to say that the number was pretty high, just because he only put in his work that it was only around 80 to 100. That doesn't mean that he was being upfront and honest, because he wanted to impress the king, but he also didn't want to make himself sound too crazy, because goats and incest isn't bad enough. There is where I completely just moved my mouse and lost my entire notes. Sorry, just 1 second. So I will give him a little bit of credit. You're still a witch hunter, so that's where you end. Will say, just from looking around, Pierre is one person that might have actually only been trying to go after bad people, except for that healing part, which I still am scratching my head on. But the evidence in the case is not fully available because history and France's revolutionary personality. A lot of historians that try to keep drama and sensationalism to a minimum, I'm not a historian, so I will be as sensational as I want, say that the number was leaning towards the lower, 80 to 100. Some people would say as much as 150. They weren't going to be pushing the numbers too much. They choose to not defend all of his actions, which is good, because a lot of his actions need to be condemned. But they will say that he was not as murderous or as mad as some of the other hunters and judges of the Burning Times. With that, I will agree with, because he wasn't... his views were whack, but he wasn't as insane as some of the other ones. If you want to see some we've already talked about, you can go through my channel. There's enough there. But it is interesting to note, in France, witch hunting was not as popular as it was in other countries, and I say that literally. Like when we looked at Germany and we went through some of those witch hunts, mainly the one little state area there, that was huge. That was a family event. You went to the town square, you watched the judges, you watched the trials, you roasted marshmallows on the fires, but that was a big deal. That was huge. Not so much in France. I think they like the guillotine more so than burning people, but it just wasn't a big deal to them, which I do find a little bit on the weird side, other than the one king that was like, end all the witches in that Basque section way over there. There wasn't a lot of witch hunting that I have found so far, and I'm going to keep digging because, gotta keep looking. But it doesn't seem like witch hunting was that popular in France. Pierre is probably the more well-known of the witch hunters in that area. And I did run across a couple of lesser known ones, but they wouldn't be hunting primarily in France. They would be hunting in Italy and Spain and a couple other places. So even though they were of French descent, they really weren't primary witch hunters in France. There's one guy that I do want to talk about because he hunted in 2 different countries. So that one will definitely be a crossover, but I just found it kind of interesting that the French, with all of their chaos over the years, when it came to the witch hunting, they were like, yeah, no, Protestant hunting, yeah, we'll do that, but not witches, not so much. They were more, I think they had other fish to fry or something. But anyway, however that worked out, I appreciate everyone who shows up and who watches this video after. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, drop a like on the video, and comment down below what your thoughts are. If you've ever heard of Pierre de Lancre, cannot say his name correctly, and if there's anyone else from France that you have heard of. Like I said, I know of one other person that has some prominence that I will talk about later, but France just didn't seem to be as bloodthirsty when it came to witches as other countries were. Like I said, they had other things going on. But other than that, I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. If you're interested, this shawl, whenever I get it finished, will be up on my website. If you're interested in seeing some of the other crocheted stuff I do, website's linked in the description. You can go check that out. I also make orgons and do all sorts of other woo-woo type stuff as well. So we will talk to you guys later. Have a great rest of your week.